Hello and welcome to Virtual and Corporate Card Strategies for Spend Management. I'm Dmitry Babayev and I'm thrilled to walk you all through this topic, joined today by a group of expert panelists who I'll introduce in just a moment. Before we'll get into that though, just a quick rundown of what to expect from this session. There's really two kind of main themes that I'm looking to explore. First off is just looking at the history and how we got to where we are today in the world of payments. And then from there, kind of pivoting towards looking at the future and how organizations can really help future-proof themselves in this ever-evolving industry. So for today's session, I'm joined by Dan Adderkirk from SAP Concur, Jenna Balkis from American Express, and Steve Carlin from MasterCard. Dan, can you start by telling a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, great. Happy to be here, Dmitry. Thank you. Dan Adderkirk from SAP Concur. I'm a product lead, generally responsible for our corporate card and payment strategy and integration with our esteemed partners. Been at Concur about 14 years and in the travel and expense industry for closing in on 3 decades.
Hi everyone, Jenna Balkis. I'm a VP of our corporate product management, and I oversee our virtual card and central bill capabilities. I've been at Amex for about 12 years and excited to be here for this discussion.
I'm Steve Carlin. I'm Director for Global Multinationals at MasterCard. Been here just coming up to 18 months, but in the payments industry for 22 years.
All right, well, if my math serves me well, I think we have over 50 years of combined history here. So let's jump right in. I'm really thrilled to pick your brains. Dan, first question to you. Just looking back at the last 20, 25 years or so, what inflection points have most changed T&E payments? Has it been policy, technology, risk, all the above?
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer would be the technology, and I think we're really hitting the first inflection point in decades. I think, from a payments integration, it's been the height of the technologies having an automated data feed of your settled transactions into an expense system. And that really hasn't changed, and it's still flat file data. But I think we're seeing in the past few years a real focus by our network partners and issuing partners to say, how does that look in a modern day stack, right? How do we get more real-time data? How do we get better data flows? How do we put better controls around cards and make them more usable, right? So I think we are in the past few years really hitting that inflection point that makes integration so much more powerful, that makes the user experience better, driving adoption, and that gives administrators control over their program in a way that they didn't have before.
And well, since you mentioned our network and issuing partners, we have them sitting right over here. Steve, anything you would add?
Yeah, I think the only constant in payments is change. So we've seen it continuously through my time in the industry, but in the most recent times, it really is endless as to where we can take it. So bringing control to the point of actual sale rather than after the fact, bringing real-time alerts to show you, is that compliant? What's the data capture requirement from the employee? And when things become easy for the employee, we start to see compliance and utilization increase.
I think that's so right, Steve. I think, we're all in this industry because it's such a dynamic space, and the pace of change over the past decade or so has been very rapid, and so it's kept us all on our toes as we look to evolve. Amex has been in this space for corporate cards over 50 years, and we went from simply card issuance to now being part of the integrated data ecosystem that our customers expect from all of us, having a seamless integrated experience. So I think what you said, Dan, we're really focused on that integrated experience through data and making sure that we can deliver data in a real time to our esteemed partners so that we can make the client experience that much better.
That's wonderful, and we'll get into data in just a moment here, but what I really want to talk about next is, many of our customers, they have ghost cards, corporate plastic, virtual cards, oftentimes all 3 or 2 of them in play, but really without a clear strategy. Where do each of those payment types succeed? Where do they fall short?
Yeah, so all of those solutions exist because corporations need flexibility. They need control, and each of those solutions can provide that in different ways for different subsets of employees or non-employees. So having that flexibility is paramount as we look at the payment solutions that we offer to our customers. So for example, for corporate card, having a corporate card program for employees who need to spend on a regular basis, whether that be business expenses, travel expenses, enforced by a clear policy around that corporate card program, helps manage that spend within a controlled ecosystem. But then you might have, temporary employees, contractors, recruits, who you don't want to issue a corporate card for a temporary amount of time or for a specific use. And so that's where virtual cards really can come in. They can provide that flexibility and that control and the ability to help you automate reconciliation by attaching that unique virtual card number to a specific budget code, for example. And that is how you can provide that flexibility and capture all that spend on one cohesive program. Then when we think about lodge cards or ghost cards, or what I reference as central bill accounts, those exist for a clear reason too, as you think about the travel expenses that corporations face. Being able to centralize all those expenses in one place, see that data, that enriched data together, helps you make business decisions, help you with supplier negotiations, and gives you insights into having that reconciliation. I think traditionally those lodged accounts have been really focused on air and rail, the traditional travel categories, and because of the rise of virtual cards, we've been able to evolve our central bill solution, BTA, to now capture hotel and incidental spend on trip. So that full end-to-end journey captured on a central bill account powered by virtual cards. I think, one way in which, that's why we're all here together. We're all, we partner across the ecosystem to enable these payment solutions. And so one way we're doing that this week is we'll announce our virtual card solution with Concur. So being able to, create a virtual card in the Concur ecosystem powered by Amex is just one way in which we want to offer that flexibility.
Yeah, very excited about that, and thrilled to explore the topic of virtual cards a little bit more here in a second. But before moving on to virtual cards, I think one thing that many customers worry about is scale, right? As organizations grow, as they expand multinationally, and many of our customers are still using central bill cards. Steve, just want to kind of pick your brain on looking at central bill cards. Can they help companies scale? Like, where are the shortfalls there, and why would they maybe want to look at something else and not necessarily depend on just central bill?
Yeah, I think when you look at centrally billed travel programs, they start to become really strong in data matching. They enable people to get a sight of who travelled, in what class did they travel, and all of the extra data. But what starts to then become problematic is the fragmentation of the data. Can you see the true cost of that trip once you incorporate the card program for the actual day-to-day sustenance, meals, ground transportation? That really starts to become difficult historically, and this is where virtual will basically be able to take that to a one vision of that employee travel. And I think, to Jenna's point, you have the ability to suddenly allow interviewees to come into your company and actually pay for that rather than through a pay and reclaim process. You have the ability to have people with cards in hand from day one in the company and not having to wait for an application process 2 weeks for it to arrive. And so whilst Lodge, I think, as it's historically being called, has had its moment, I think we start to then move into a virtual card environment for travel, all types of travel, and for the trip itself. There's still some acceptance issues that I think we just need to overcome as an industry. I think hotels, it's patchy as to which will accept a virtual card on mobile. But once we overcome those challenges, I think we start to see virtual take over all of the lodge and ghost traffic we've seen historically.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that collaboration that we're seeing amongst the partner ecosystem, I think it's really important as we talk about those challenges for customers to create that same ecosystem within their corporation, right? Because if you're operating your expense program separately from your travel program, separately from your card program, you are going to experience these difficulties, right? If you're developing those programs in a silo, you're going to create more of those challenges than they're going to be solved. So if you haven't already, I think that's a tip to take away, is to say, bring your stakeholders together. If you're not running those programs centrally or collaborating, super important thing to do is to drive that integration within your corporation, just as we're driving the technology
Yeah.
integration together.
Absolutely.
And so I think what I'm hearing at the core of this, though, is it ultimately comes down to the data, right? Whether it's data to assist with reconciliation, to assist with compliance, managing risk. Jenna, when we think about just kind of the data elements that matter the most to finance teams, where do legacy programs fall short on delivering that data?
Yeah, I think it's ensuring that you have the right connection points in the places where our customers are doing business, right? And so that's why we've talked about how important it is to partner across the integrated ecosystem, and we're doing that more and more so that we can connect payment, expense, and ERP systems together to create that seamless experience that Dan was talking about. And so I think the data elements that we are hearing from our customers that are important is that the real-time data, and so making sure that they can have data faster to make decisions or to ensure compliant spend. And it's data to help support downstream processes like level 3 or itemized data to help with downstream processes like VAT reclaim, for example. And so, we've launched real-time expense with Concur, enabling that real-time authorization to power through to the end user, so that they can upload their receipts, or they can add the folks that were at the dinner with them to their expense report in real time, and they don't have to worry about having a lost receipt when they get back to their office. I've already been uploading receipts on my entire trip. It's been great, and I know that I don't have to bring those receipts home with me. So it provides that peace of mind and that reassurance that, that efficiency that maybe wasn't there before. And then in terms of that level 3 or itemized data, we are evolving our suite of APIs to be able to deliver that into the partner ecosystem, so that the end users and those finance teams can leverage it in a more efficient way.
Mm-hmm. And really that real-time data piece, I think, is a key component to all of this, right? In the 2-3 days that it takes for settlement to complete before charges would historically post to Concur, and anything can happen. You lose your receipt, maybe an infrequent traveler submits a cash transaction because they don't know that they still need to wait a couple days for their charge to post to remind them. So yeah, very thrilled that we've been able to launch American Express real-time data, as well as with MasterCard too. Steve, Dan, anything else you'd want to add to that?
I just think the real-time alerts is that big inflection point that we talked about on the first question, really, that the ability to bring all of that data for finance to the point of sale rather than after the fact, that's going to have the biggest change, because, of course, what you will see is you've got the data for VAT reclaim, you've got the compliance to make sure that that is a permitted spend category and it's not begging forgiveness later, 3, 4, 5 days when the return is completed. We know the receipt is there because you've been able to do it at the time that it was handed to you. And for big group dinners, have you got the name of every employee that was attended to that dinner or guest as well? And so we can bring all of that to the time of transaction, and that just, I think, is what matters to a corporate.
And I would say that I think also historically, with the lack of real-time data, customers have turned to adding more controls, more just limitations on their employees, just to try to tighten that spend in a bit more. But which authorization controls actually work in changing spend behavior versus just adding friction? Like, what actually helps reduce leakage?
I think employees like to know that if the card works, I'm allowed to do it. So we can bring authorization controls around perhaps merchant category, blocking any merchant categories that aren't permitted to be spent by that employee. And I think that will increase the compliance of the card program overall, because the cardholder has the confidence that it's working. With the real-time alerts that we talked about as well, we can bring those alerts to the point of sale to say that this isn't actually allowed under your program's rules. And so, again, that employee can have that confidence and drive the compliance rate.
And I wouldn't even necessarily consider it potentially leakage, but the ability to scale your card program to a much broader set of employees, right? So I think historically, because of the liability of having, cards out there for every employee that, maybe they mistakenly spend, there's a much greater liability for misuse, right, in that case. And you've got a bunch of cards out there, but now you can make that decision confidently, maybe to those uncarded employees, you can now issue virtual cards for certain payments that aren't traveling. You could also issue more cards because you could put controls on those cards that say, now Dimitri only gets to spend when he's on a trip for these pre-approved expenses. So I think all these things enable really program administrators to think about not only the adoption of individuals who have cards already, right, and using the corporate card versus a personal card, but also carding more employees and driving more spend onto those cards.
And well, I promise I do want to get into virtual cards and kind of looking ahead in just a moment here, but one last question for you all is, where do we still see the most manual effort in card programs today, especially around reconciliation or even on the employee side of things?
I'd say that. So I think travel still has some way to go to catch up and make sure that the data that we see is complete and is useful to the administrators of the program. If you have a lodge program that has a 97, 98% compliance rate or data matching rate, that's fantastic. But when you have a multinational corporate with thousands of transactions, that can suddenly add up. And so we have the hotel, of course, issued for a certain amount, but then you have the taxes, you have the resort fees, you have sustenance that was put onto the room whilst you were there. Suddenly the data doesn't match anymore, and that gets spit out for manual follow-up. This is where the virtual cards that we come to talk about will have the biggest effect, and I think the biggest improvement to a compliance program.
I think you also see manual effort when employees spend outside of the corporate card. So that's thematically what we've been talking about. But whether I have a corporate card and I choose to use my personal card, or I haven't been given one, and so that manual effort to ask for reimbursement and submit the reimbursement because that transaction has not flowed through the expense management system just creates a hassle for the end user or the spender to submit that expense report. So being able to streamline as much as possible, whether that be through an actual physical card or a virtual card, just makes all of those processes, those manual processes, go away.
And I mean, you mentioned the sort of more granular data, let's just call it, of level 2, level 3, and I know those are being stitched together from many, many participants in the ecosystem, which is why it's so challenging. But I mean, I think that's the holy grail. The more we get to that granular level of detail, it's going to give folks who are administering those programs much more confidence that they've got visibility into what that spend actually was, right? And I think that's what people are striving for and waiting for, right? To say, yeah, we got it at a hotel, but are we going to get it from other merchants? Can we stitch together more of that point of sale data so that my expense report looks like my receipt that I receive at the restaurant, but without me having to take a picture or do anything else? That digital data flowing along with the transaction is really the end state of now we can control everything in a really automated, elegant, seamless way for the user and to drive compliance.
I think that's the beauty of virtual, in that you can give it all of the data that you need at the point of the transaction or the card being generated. That data stays with that transaction through the entire life cycle, so that by the time it is spent, you're already complete in terms of reconciliation. So you haven't got to chase stuff after the fact. And like you say, we haven't got granular data missing that will lead to VAT left on the table that you could be claiming, that leads to non-compliant spend. By the time that card even is in existence, all of the data needed to reconcile is there.
So I guess with that, let's maybe pivot and look ahead a little bit. I'm hearing virtual cards as a kind of a big component, so I might already know the answer to this question, but really what I'm wondering is, what does a modern T&E payment stack look like 2-3 years from now? And why is now the right time for organizations to really start kind of rethinking their payment strategy?
It's embedded within your ecosystem. So it's embedded within Concur. The alerts are real time. It's on mobile, and it's low touch. And I think once it becomes a consumer-like experience for the employee, then it's easy to use, and trips become far simpler to carry out. Sometimes I will think twice about putting a transaction on my corporate card if there's a lot of hassle after the fact to try and get that reconciled. Maybe companies love that, but it means that as an employee using that card, there's friction. and that's what we want to try and remove.
I love that analogy of like the consumer like experience. That's the expectation that we have today and that we're facing. And so I think this is a moment where we've all invested in creating that frictionless experience, and it's because we want to deliver on that expectation. And so I think all the points you made are exactly right in terms of how we need to show up and deliver to our customers.
And with virtual cards, I think one other thing too that is worth noting is it kind of shifts the, the authorization, well, not the payment authorization, but the employee spending authorization, right? Usually, or with more historic programs, the employee has a corporate card, they go spend, and then they essentially ask for forgiveness if they've broken policy. Now with virtual cards, employees are needing to ask permission, right? They submit a request, their manager needs to approve the spend, all of that is budgeted for before the spend actually ever happens. But the key thing is we still need employees to actually use the corporate card instead of, or the virtual card in this case, instead of defaulting to their personal card. Dan, just curious from you, but why do employees still default to their personal cards in many scenarios?
It's obviously that I want my Sky Miles. But you know, all joking aside, that is a big deal, especially here in the United States, right? How do you convince employees, and there are lots of ways to do that, but I'm motivated to use my personal card because I get a benefit from that. In the past, corporate cards, they've provided some advantage. Yes, 3 days later, I get a transaction, so I don't have to fill out some data, which makes it a little bit easier. But the only way historically that companies have driven adoption is really through the stick rather than the carrot, right? Mandating things, making it painful if I'm not using my corporate card. But now with all the things that we're talking about, we now have the carrot. Wow, my expense report just went away, right? I got this transaction, it told me I needed a receipt, I took a picture of the receipt sitting there after my dinner, and I'm done with it. And that transaction flows through and I know it's compliant, right? Steve noted all the benefits to virtual cards, which are very similar, right? I don't have to worry about being reimbursed now for that virtual card transaction. So I think we're seeing these things that, you know, I'm going to leave my personal card in my wallet because now the pain of dealing with these business transactions are gone, right? So I think that coupled with the fact that, you know, my corporate card becomes a part of how I travel. So I love that concept of now employees are motivated to do this. The first time that I took my Amex card and got that transaction, I was like, my personal card's staying, I'm never using it again. Like, I don't need those miles that bad. So I think that's a huge part of driving that adoption, right, is just that better user experience, right, and that confidence that you're doing the right thing because that spend is controlled. So I think along with the evolution of technology that we're all talking about here, I think that's really going to make this process so much better for employees and corporations in thinking about how do I go put this out into my ecosystem, right? How do I ensure that I'm using these great things that are being brought to me by my networks and by my issuers, right? So I think we'll touch on sort of what is that next step, what can I do? But you know, I think that's a big part of that reducing the challenges historically of using a corporate card and making it really a pleasurable experience.
Yeah. I think Dan's mentioned the elephant in the room, personal rewards. You know, that is the biggest driver, but it is coupled with other things. So, you know, the friction of making that payment, the friction of doing a return, the friction of not being certain my card will be accepted here, all of these things that come with a corporate card program. Am I allowed to do this spend? Is this something I'm allowed to do? So once you remove all of those fears, and as I say, consumerize it, it just becomes so common sense to actually use the corporate card over your personal card.
And honestly, I think a big part of it too is that, you know, historically it's been a kind of a big thing, right? Getting your points. You have your road warriors who then influence new hires at the company to, hey, you know, use this card, get these points, fly, you know, for free. But now is a great opportunity for organizations as they're bringing on early talent, as they're bringing on new hires who might not have access to a corporate card right away. You be the influencer, right? Show them that, hey, here's a virtual card. Here's how you can start spending right away, not have to have the burden of having your corporate expenses tie in with your personal expenses. So definitely, I think, a great time for employees to, or for organizations to adopt virtual payments, if nothing else, to start influencing employees to spend more on corporate.
Yeah, and that concept of kind of that creating a product that looks and feels a little bit more like the consumer product. I mean, you do see offerings out there where you put status on corporate card offerings, or you put rideshare benefits on corporate offerings. So you see that more and more as issuers think about the overall value prop of those programs. But I agree. I think being able to put those controls before they spend to have that peace of mind is truly critical. So yeah, I think it's the right direction.
Yeah, and it really sounds to you like going more towards that kind of better consumer experience in the business world is going to be a key driver of that too. Yeah. Like when I'm just out traveling personally or going grocery shopping, whatever it may be, I don't even need to take my wallet out of my pocket. I have everything, in my mobile wallet. Tap to pay is, it's rare to find someone who doesn't accept tap to pay at this point, right? So would you say that that's a key factor to driving that consumer experience, is just having business cards in the mobile wallet?
Absolutely. I think companies want that efficient, secure payment method, and being able to have my corporate card in my mobile wallet not only gives me the peace of mind that I don't have to rummage through my luggage or my bags as I'm traveling to find my corporate card, but it also gives Amex the peace of mind as my employer that I'm going to use that card on all of my on-trip expenses. Yesterday, when I was coming into the conference, that was it. I just had my phone out, and I was tapping as I went to get my coffee, to get my lunch. And even, I think, traditionally at hotels, you need to present a physical form of payment, but I tapped to check into the hotel too. That felt really good. And so you see even the more, the more traditional travel providers like hotels evolving their point of sale systems. So I think it's becoming more seamless, and we're living it too as we're at this conference.
Yeah, my last several hotel stays, I've not even had to stop at the front desk anymore to show my card, none of that. I just check in on my phone, get a mobile wallet, or a mobile key to my room, and head straight up without ever needing to show a physical card.
Yeah. And a few years ago, I was traveling on a business trip as well, and one of my colleagues unfortunately had their wallet stolen, and it had her passport, all of her cards. Wouldn't it have been great if we could have just provisioned her a virtual card so she could have kept spending easily on the trip? That wasn't the reality then, but that is the reality now.
I think as an employee of a large corporation, it's on us to kind of keep pushing for that acceptance as well, because we do still see a major hotel chain on a trip to Miami last month required my physical card in order to check in. They wouldn't accept the tap to pay. If you're at a restaurant and they don't have the squares and the toasts of this world, you have to leave your seat to go and pay at the waiter station. So we still see these things happen sometimes, and it's on us to kind of keep pushing that. But once we close that gap, I think it becomes virtual only. So there are many trips that I take that, like you, Jenna, I just don't touch my physical card if I don't need to.
All right, well, I think it's clear. Virtual cards are obviously the future. Virtual cards are the direction to go, right? But for corporate card administrators, for travel and expense administrators who are looking to maybe implement virtual card programs at their organizations, of course, their leadership is going to ask about, what's the benefit, right? Mm-hmm. And yeah, you've laid out some key points here, but which KPIs actually improve when modern payment strategies are deployed?
Yeah, I think thematically we've been talking about them throughout this conversation, but time saving and just overall efficiency, that's really hard to measure. I think, but all of these things that we've been discussing in terms of the pre-auth controls, the controls that allow you to kind of pre-reconcile the transaction, all of that has downstream impact into how much time your employees are spending on that reconciliation and expense management processes. Improved compliance is one that we've been talking about as well, and ensuring that you are spending within policy. And then that broader adoption, right? I think if you can put more spend on your corporate program, as a corporate, that helps with your rebates or incentives that you have with your issuers. And so putting more spend on the program is a win-win, and I think that's one that could be easily measured.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I'm 100% with Jenna on this. It's the adoption of the program itself, the compliance, the reduction in fraud. the time spent for an employee to find a block to do the reconciliation, maybe every 30 days they've got to find an hour to sit and do all of this stuff, that goes away, and I think that's the biggest improvement that an organisation would see.
Enough said. You hit it.
Yeah.
All right, well, I know we're just coming up on time here. I do want to end with one last question for all of you, and that is, if there's one takeaway, one or two, in one or two sentences here, what should organizations do in the next 30 to 90 days if they want to start modernizing their payment strategy successfully?
I think it's going to be no surprise what our answer is. Test out virtual card, adopt it for your program. You have employees out there that don't have the ability to spend but may need to spend. Try it out. One of our mandates is to make sure that you can seamlessly adopt these solutions, and so that's what we're trying to do. But that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, and the same. Embed virtual cards into your T&E workflow. Look at expense audit tools, and I think you will see a huge improvement in the program.
Yeah. Talk to your issuer. Talk to your bank partner. Talk, if you haven't already, like I mentioned before, bring the folks who own the card programs and card relationships along with the folks that own the expense and the travel relationships. It's a great place to start to really drive the collaboration in the same way that we're sitting here collaborating. So absolutely, do those things tomorrow.
Let's do it. All right. Well, before we officially wrap up here, I do want to first thank you all for joining our session here. Before you watch the next session, we would really appreciate your feedback. If you would take a quick survey, it helps us with just structuring future sessions and knowing what is the most helpful for you and the audience. So with that, on behalf of Steve, Jenna, and Dan, we really thank you all for spending your time with us here today. And for the three of you, I appreciate you all joining me here as well. This has been really insightful, and I hope everyone else got as much out of this as I did. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.